ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us in this hopefully very interesting discussion. The question that this panel will try and address in its wisdom is how do we manage to have ample energy to satisfy all our needs while reducing emissions in the production and consumption of the energy and keeping the cost of the energy at levels that do not adversely affect growth and economic prosperity. There are ramifications to that. There are, moving from one equilibrium, which is where we stand now, to a future equilibrium, which is going to be net zero. It's fine, it's all clear. It's the way there that is difficult, fraught with difficulties and challenges. As supply shifts away from fossil fuels and demand shifts away from towards electricity, there are all the production and transportation distribution systems get very, very stressed and require more capacity, and we'll discuss about that. If we retire fossil fuel capacity faster than necessary, then we may have to recall it as it happened here in Greece a few years ago. There are technological limitations to the speed at which new technologies are adapted and adopted and become mainstream, which may cause delays. And, I was looking at the prices of electricity in Europe, yesterday's prices, and I found out that the Spain and Portugal yesterday paid for their electricity €4 per megawatt hour, Greece 62 euros, and the UK 62 euros, and Germany 46. This is not an integrated European electricity market. It's something else. There are many markets, but not connected. And a final point, introductory point, is that there are targets, there are hopes. There is COP28 every year. There are national plans. Greece has a national plan for that. But those plans are not down to the detail, the implementation detail necessary to move forward in terms of consistency and fitting one with the other. We have the pleasure to have a panel of distinguished guests to discuss all these issues. I'll start with Nikos Tsafos sitting next to me. He's our Prime Minister's Chief Energy Advisor, so he knows all about the Greek energy system and situation. An energy expert with international global experience, and recently he was the chair for the energy and geopolitics at the Center for Strategic International Studies. Next to him we have Dev Sanyal. Dev is the CEO of VARO Energy. Is a new energy company, if I can put it this way. But before that he was Legacy Energy, 30 years with BP. The last 10 of which was global head for gas and low carbon energy. He knows all about energy. Lord Francis Maude, sitting next to Sanyal, is the chairman of FMA, a consultancy, and has been a minister for many years. The last post was Minister for Trade and Investment between 2015 and 16. Many ministerial positions, a stint as chairman of the Conservative Party and co-chair of the Greek-British Symposium. Aristotelis next to him. He is the CEO of the latest Greek energy company called Principia, correct? Which is a joint venture between Enel and Maguire Asset Management. He is an engineer with a lot of experience in renewable energy, and he will shed some light on that. Next is Professor Ioannis Maniatis. It's Professor of the Digital Systems at the University of Piraeus, and a Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change for 6 years. Strong views on the subject. He recently published a book with a very intriguing title, Because There Is No Planet B. I think we should bear that in mind. Last but not last in the panel is John Karydas. John is the CEO of Renewables at the Copelouzos group. Renewables and battery storage, correct? So I'm not missing anything. Although a computer science by training, he has spent all his working life with energy at the group, and he is spearheading the effort to become one of the largest providers of renewables. I took longer than I should have done, and I won't follow any particular this order, but I'll start with Lord Maude, that comes from a non-energy background, and ask him what he thinks are the geopolitical and purely political risks for energy security in the short to medium term, and how we go about mitigating them.
Well, thank you very much, Costas. And it's sometimes said that the transition to net zero is kind of somehow inconsistent with creating energy security. Actually, I think they're completely related, because if we're serious about renewables, these are inherently indigenous sources of energy, and for many countries can replace imported fossil fuels. Optimists among us have always thought that technology and innovation will ultimately create potential answers to the climate crisis. And you can see that happening with the cost of solar. I mean, it is now clear that solar and wind, particularly onshore wind, are the cheapest sources of new generation. The cost of solar panels from China in particular is kind of tumbling down, and there's now a glut of solar panels. There was an article in the Financial Times recently, although it was on April the 1st, saying how in Germany and the Netherlands, people are putting up garden fences made of solar panels because they are so cheap, and you get energy out of them. There is huge investment in China, 217 gigawatts of new solar in China very recently, and that compares with, in the UK, a total in generation of 75 gigawatts. The truth is that all countries have renewable potential, which is currently hugely underexploited. And as I say, this will be indigenous resource that can, in many cases, replace imported fossil fuels. And either by replacing coal or oil-based generation, or through the move to electric vehicles. And obviously, you then have the challenge of dealing with intermittency, which is inherent in renewables. Storage is changing all the time. The growth, the development of sodium batteries, again, particularly from China, with the huge potential for grid-scale storage, and gravity. We're all familiar with pumped storage, but in the Czech Republic, there's a company who are developing gravity-based storage in disused mine shafts. And so the innovation is going ahead at huge pace. And then you've got interconnectors and the 3Cs initiative, with interconnectors running up the eastern rim of Europe is part of that. And of course, that gives the potential for southern solar in the south to be balanced by wind in the north. And of course, wind and solar are inversely correlated, both on a daily and a seasonal basis. What are the risks? Well, interconnectors are themselves a risk because they create vulnerability. And the other risk, I suppose, is that so much of this innovation and so much of this production that's essential for the transition is coming from China. And the propensity both in the EU and in the US, to protectionism is inhibiting the development of alternative, low-cost production in countries like India, for example. So those seem to me to be the particular risks.
So one risk is having limitations of supply of new things coming from China. And part of the risk is self-inflicted because you're not producing enough of that within Europe. That's what the point, isn't it?
Well, I mean, Europe will be a higher cost producer, clearly, and as will the US. I mean, the cost of producing a solar panel in China is 1/3 of the cost in the US. So that's producing these things at home is never going to be the complete answer. But the one thing you should do when you've got a preponderant supplier is support the creation of capacity elsewhere. And the sensible place to do that is in other low-cost, and indeed in lower-cost environments than China. India, Vietnam, Bangladesh, these are all places where there is potential, and there you're balancing your geopolitical risk.
Thank you, Francis. Professor Maniatis, with the No Planet B, how do we ensure availability of energy, sustainability of energy, and affordability of energy? What are the two key things that we can do to keep these three things together over the next 40 years? Because there's no Planet B.
Now, talking about all these issues, we must have in mind two words for Europe: strategic autonomy. And in the context of strategic autonomy, in the hardcore of this context, is energy autonomy. Now, we all know that we have the well-known trilemma for energy: sustainability, affordability, and security. During the last decades, 2 or 3 decades, in Europe, we have discussed and given priority on only green transition, on sustainability. And we have forgotten the affordability as well as the energy security issue. After the Russian invasion in Ukraine, things have changed. This is my first comment. My second comment has to do with money. And I'm talking about the Recovery and Resilience Fund, RRF. Let's recall what is going on. The Politico magazine has recently reported that from the total amount of 700 billion euros available for RRF, the governments, the member states' governments, have used only 200 billion euros, which means that the remaining 500 billion euros will not be used due to concrete bureaucratic problems and constraints coming from regulations. And if we compare these numbers with the number $1.3 trillion given by the Biden administration for the recovery and the reconstruction of the American economy, we see in front of our eyes that we have a very bitter truth. We need to do something in Europe in order to attract more investments. My third comment is whether we have learned from our mistakes. I'm not sure. But what I can understand, and the Commission has declared, is that during the last 30 or 40 years, we will need, besides renewables, we'll need many quantities of natural gas. And let me just remind to all of us that in 2015, the European production in natural gas was 150 BCM per annum, 150, and now, some years later, is only 40 BCM per annum. The remaining, the missing 100 BCM has been replaced by imports, by third countries. And to finalize my comments, I think that we need to restart our thinking. Green transition as such alone cannot be a complete strategy. We need altogether green transition, affordability, and energy security, which means that we, instead to say it as a slogan, instead of having the strategy either renewables or natural gas, the right strategy is both renewables and natural gas, at least for the next 30 years. And to finalize, I will repeat our over-dependence on China, on critical raw materials, on processing infrastructure. Just to remind all of us, 85% of the global production in photovoltaics comes from China, 60% of wind turbines from China, 90% of batteries from China, and about 50% of electric vehicles from China. So we need to transform Europe and Greece from regions or countries doing just importing and consuming products to transform them in regions that produce and export products. And finally, let's have in mind the big problem, maybe the biggest one, the fact that only during the last 2 or 3 years, the European Commission and the national governments have understood the problem of inadequacy of grids in transportation and grids in transmission of electricity, mainly. I think that if we find some solutions for these problems, the future for Europe will be better.
Thank you. I keep this not either or gas or renewables, but both and more, which is a key message for that. I will turn to John Karydas. We're touching upon the last point that Professor Maniatis made. What about grids and connectivity between Europe and non-Europe, like Egypt, or connectivity within Europe? John.
Well, thank you. As Professor Maniatis has identified, and as we all believe in this room believe, one critical path towards the achievement of our targets, not only the environmental targets vis-à-vis green transition and total elimination of CO2 emissions, but also achieving energy security, is interconnection. Besides expansion of penetration of renewables, of energy storage, because we need energy storage to aid the faster and increased penetration of renewables, but also improvements of the grid and interconnections. To give an example of the criticality of interconnections between Europe and third countries is a recent study conducted by McKinsey a few months ago, identifying the key obstacles of Europe towards achieving green transition targets. And one of such key obstacles is the scarcity of land available to implement the required number of renewable energy plants to achieve our targets. For example, the renewable energy plants required for France, Italy, and Belgium to achieve their 240 target require land more than Belgium, land equivalent to Belgium. So you understand that we need to expand the energy borders of Europe, and we need to find ways to bring
the energy space we need.
The energy space, yes. Available land to Europe to support Greece, of course, and Europe towards such transition. And as Greece, we are lucky enough not only to have good sun radiation and, of course, availability of wind, but also proximity with countries like Egypt, which not only satisfy the criteria of availability of land, the availability of suitable land with immense wind power and sun radiation, but also the will of becoming an exporter of green energy to Greece and Europe. That is the underlying concept behind a Greki project that our group is developing, which is the interconnection between Egypt and Greece, and via Greece with Europe, in order to bring 3,000 megawatts of green energy produced in Egypt to Greece and Europe, towards exactly achieving all these targets, environmental targets, reduction of CO2 emissions, reducing the dependency on natural gas and, of course, Russian natural gas, energy targets, but also, as you very correctly mentioned, you said affordability. By implementing such interconnection, what we achieve, besides all other benefits, to integrate the markets, which will lead to lower prices to the benefit of the consumers. So you understand, by interconnection, we also address the issue of affordability. We manage to integrate the markets and hence reduce the cost to the benefits, as I said, of all customers in Greece and Europe. Moreover, we have important benefits for the stability of the system, because with an HVDC, a DC interconnection, the interconnected systems benefited from increased stability. Also, we have tremendous benefits for the Greek economy regarding new jobs, opportunities for new businesses, and, of course, substantial increase of the Greek GDP. And moreover, besides these obvious energy, environmental, and financial benefits, I think the most important issue for such interconnection is the geopolitical benefit, which means that Greece will not only become an important energy hub of southeastern Europe and, of course, eastern Mediterranean, but also we will benefit from the increased validity of our sovereign rights of the exclusive economic zones, resulting in an increased national security. So you understand that interconnections can play a very important role with a multifold of strategic benefits, whose benefits are beyond the borders of Greece.
Right. Excellent. Thank you, John. I think the notion of interconnections increasing the energy space of Europe is important, and also stressing the advantage of Greece in playing the role of building these interconnections and linking it with linking the Europe with more energy. I'll turn to Dev Sanyal, who has been an insider in the energy industry for so many years. What is the industry's view, emerging strategies from your industry towards this transition? What are the things that the industry is looking forward to?
Kalibera, and thank you for having me here, Costas. It's good to be back in Greece, a place that I've visited very often, as my wife is Greek. When I started my career 3 decades ago, my father gave me a book by one of the icons of our industry, John Paul Getty. And John Paul Getty had a very simple mantra for life, which was rise early, work hard, strike oil. Now, I think 3 decades later, I think the first two still apply. Rise early, work hard. But the third has changed somewhat, which is now find new sources of energy, not just one source of energy. And I think this is a big change in the last 3 decades, which I think is going to be ahead of us for a very, very long time. For a millennia, we've actually had one dominant source of energy, biomass, coal, oil, etc. But now we are in a world which is going to be a lot more multidimensional and therefore a lot more complex. And I think it's very important to think about the energy strategies of today and tomorrow in this multidimensional way. Now, what actually does the world look like? When you look a step back, 3 years ago, Fatih Birol of the IEA published the Pathway to Net Zero. In the meanwhile, we now have two geopolitical crises in the world. We have seen financial markets change their tone very significantly with rising interest rates. We have seen massive volatility in the energy system, both in conventional energies as well as new energies. To give you an example, we now have the price of oil touching essentially around $90. You remember 3 years ago at one point, there was a negative price for oil on one day. We have in voluntary carbon markets an 80% rise between 2019 and 2021 and an 83% dip in the last 18 months. We have seen the EU ETS touch 100 last year, and now it's sort of hovering between 50 and 60. So extraordinary volatility, and we need to manage that. On the other hand, one can be optimistic too. We now see renewable as a very big part of the entire power system. 50% of new power last year came from renewable power. When you look at Asia, a big source of growth in energy demand, we are now seeing essentially solar compete very effectively, as Francis was saying, with conventional coal, 13% cheaper, and actually projected to go to 32% cheaper by 2030. We have seen the IRA in America, as Professor Maniatis mentioned. We've seen the European Green Deal. So there are, of course, things that are happening that can give us cause for optimism. But what actually needs to happen? I think there are 5 things that need to happen. Number one, we have to be a lot more multidimensional as we think about energy security as well as affordability. I think it's a conceit to say that we remain with the current status quo and expect a different set of results. The reality is there is too much of dependence today on one source of energy, and the price has gone up very significantly. Therefore, as someone said earlier, making sure that we can actually create more diversification is very important. Number 2, we have to build economically viable businesses that are also socially acceptable and politically relevant. Therefore, it is incredibly important that we build businesses with a convergence of collaboration between customers, so it has to be demand-led, regulators, and the consumer. The consumer has to pay. And therefore, we need to make sure that we bring the consumer alongside as well. Number 3, I think it is very important to be practical about the energy transition, not ideological. So this idea that we just do what happened in my country, India, in mobile telephony, where one day you had fixed line phones, 30 years ago, there were 10 million fixed line phones in India. Today there are 15 million fixed line phones, but there are 890 million mobile phones. This is not the energy system. We will not see, a switch on and switch off. Therefore, we've got to think about the transition in a sensible way, and the role of natural gas is very important, and essentially it's very important to consider how conventional energies partner with renewable and new energies, which is why in VARO Energy, we're in 26 countries, we have a big European base, we invest in both conventional energies, but we're growing faster in sustainable and new energies. But we've got to work it together because of intermittency and because of the very important issue of affordability and competitiveness. And the final 2 points I'd make is very simply, we have to have a regulatory construct that is stable, which means we need to make sure there's a cycle time for permits, we need to make sure there's power access to actually deliver on the proposition. Having a choppy regulatory environment does not create a set of conditions that actually enables investments. And the final point I'd make, and this is very important, sometimes we think about the new as just brand new. The truth is the old can actually be deployed in the new. And by that I mean repurposing of existing infrastructure. Why build in these new energy forms, new steel, new concrete, take the existing energy forms, refineries can become biorefineries. Green hydrogen production can occur in gray hydrogen facilities, and we're investing in that in Germany. We're investing in that in Rotterdam and other places. And at the same time, there are capabilities that can be deployed. Process safety, integrity management are all relevant. Having a transition that looks like the coal transition would be terrible. We've got to bring people alongside us. And that's, I think, the just transition. Economically vibrant and socially acceptable, and therefore politically relevant.
Thank you, Dev. I will keep 2 points there. The need to deliver, the delivery capabilities, and make use of the old, because it's cheaper and it's there, rather than building it from scratch. Thank you. I will turn to Aristotelis Chavadas with the key question: how far can renewables go? John Karydas mentioned that we need a couple of Belgiums to build more renewable capacity. How far can they go in serving the purpose of the transition?
I think it's proven where renewables can go. I mean, we are talking now about sustainability, and we all know that the sustainable solution is the turn to renewables. The acceleration towards renewables will help the sustainability. By the way, I was in a meeting last week where there was a lot of discussion how much risk estimation is taking place in businesses, in countries, in sectors, about the real effects of the climate change to their business. What's going to be the impacts of the climate change on a soft drink industry, for example, in 20 years, in 30 years? Are the sales booming? Are the sales coming less? Is the taste changing? The water taste is changing? Several things that sometimes we want to see, and sometimes we choose not to see, because they will affect business decisions and real business plans that we have, let's say, forecasted under different circumstances. So sustainable means, in my point of view, renewables. And this is the clear choice that the Western world, and especially Europe, has taken since some decades ago. And that's why this scale, this massive investment towards renewables brought the second thing, which means affordability, because renewables are cheaper. Renewables are faster to be constructed. This is the fastest route even to EBITDA for an investor, because you construct a renewable project much faster than any other, let's say, infrastructure for generating electricity. And the third thing is about security. Security, in my opinion, is interlinked with renewables, because renewables is a technology that you can produce only in your country. And okay, if you have a lot more to produce, you can also ship to another country. But in my view, these three preconditions are covered by renewables. Now the problem is different. In my view is that while the renewables industry has accelerated its pace, gave better prices, lower costs, faster infrastructure implementation, the rest of the sectors are not mature enough. We have governments that are not improving the way of making decisions. This is a clear bottleneck. We see in our businesses every 2-3 months the world is changing, and the governments are not changing fast enough in making decisions, in accommodating investments, in even realizing mistakes and correcting the mistakes that they did in the past. So we have an issue there. The second issue is that we neglected to see the impacts in different sectors, meaning grids, a huge problem, because until 2-3 years ago, nobody was really talking about grids, and now we see that this is a problem, and it becomes a bigger problem knowing the problems we have in decision-making. So this will slow down even more. But even small examples like today's situation, everybody in the renewables industry, in the electricity generation industry, knows and realizes that today we know that renewables new renewables should be paired with storage infrastructure. This is the way forward, because we already have a lot of generation capacity from renewables only. So we need to be prudent, we need to be wise, and we need to be smart now. Any new infrastructure which is renewables only without taking into consideration the challenges that we have in the grids, in the generation of older infrastructure, in the curtailments we face as generators recently, it's a mistake. It should be corrected. We should be wise on time. And this is a turn that we also, as a company, that we are lucky enough to be based on the experience of two giants, on Enel, a traditional utility that is the biggest energy company in Europe, and Macquarie, which is the biggest financial player in the world. We see it on time, and that's why we turned all our strategy towards these investments. All our new projects, all our projects under development are paired with storage infrastructure because we see the need of the grid. Now what we need to see is the governmental will to understand that this is the way forward. We see from recent discussions that the governments already realized this trend, and we hope to see it becoming a reality pretty soon.
Thank you. And that was a message for the government about accelerating processes. Turning to Nikos Tsafos, we heard about the geopolitical risks, about the diversity of sources, connectivity, storage, delivery capabilities, and my point about markets not being as efficient as they should be. Are all these factors integrated in the Greek government's approach to the future, to the transition?
Thank you. Absolutely. I mean, first of all, I think it's important to, sometimes when I hear people talk about the energy transition, they describe it as something that will happen in the future. And that's not true. If you look at Greece, there's been an incredible transformation that has taken place over the last few years. Think about this. Our generation from lignite has declined by 87% since 2005. We are back to where we were on lignite in the early 1970s. So I think that's a reminder that we talk about energy as this big system that doesn't change very quickly. How can we do it? As a country, we've essentially gotten out of the coal business in 2 decades. That is a remarkable transformation. We've done this in large part by relying on indigenous resources, our sun and our wind. We have doubled our capacity of solar and wind since 2019. We have now at the point where almost 50% of our generation comes from the sun and the wind, 60% if you add water, hydro. We are the #1 country in Europe on solar, the #7th country in Europe on wind. If you combine wind and solar, we're #4 in Europe. There are not a lot of lists where Greece is #4 in Europe, at least not where 1 is good. We are a leader in this space. We talked about networks. Networks is one of those areas, grids, that suffered from the energy crisis. If you look at the capital expenditures of our distribution system operator, the VA, they were cut by half between 2012 and 2017. The VA has brought that back up and rising in 2023. We have essentially doubled our investment in grids. We have made a huge bet on energy efficiency, supporting consumers, whether they're households or businesses or the public sector. We have a manufacturing index that is outperforming the Eurozone average. And a lot of it is actually energy intensive. I think there's a tendency in Europe to think that there's a massive deindustrialization, everything's going to America. I would recommend that if you hold these views, you look at some of the data, because the data might reveal a completely different picture. And there is an incredible success story in Greek manufacturing that is taking place. On mobility, Greece in 2023, we don't have the final data yet, so don't take this as a statement of fact. It's my projection, and I think it's going to be correct. In 2023, transportation probably surpassed power generation as the largest source of emissions in Greece because we have brought our power sector emissions down so much. So for us, when we think about the energy transition, it's not just electricity. We have a lot of work to do on electricity, but that is on an incredible trajectory. So we're switching now more of our focus on mobility, where when this government took office, electric vehicles were 0.4% of sales, 0.4%. Last year, they were 11.3, okay, 20-fold increase. We're not touching yet the EU average, but we've cut our distance quite a bit. We're making a huge bet now on carbon capture and storage to support our industry that is faced with the removal of free allowances for heavy industrial sectors. We have, I think, one of the most composed, pragmatic, forward-leaning plans. Everything I told you is performance, not plans. Performance. All the numbers I gave you are performance. Yes, we have plans. Yes, we have a vision. Yes, we have a strategy. I'm talking about performance, what we have accomplished so far. It's very easy for me to stand up and write a piece of paper, turn out a model and say, this is how we're going to do it, publish a piece of paper, feel good about myself and go home. That's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about performance. And I think when you look at the performance of the Greek energy system, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a remarkable transformation that we can all be very, very proud of. And that gives us an incredible foundation for continuing to push forward in a smart way, leaning on our competitive advantages, being fiscally prudent. You can lose a lot of money trying to support stuff that doesn't work. And that, I feel, is going to be the balance that we will try to keep in Greece. And I feel very good about where we are and where we're headed.
Thank you. A reassuring statement. We only have 5 minutes. It's the size of the panel that didn't allow for a proper second round of the discussion. But I would like to pose the same question to all of you. And I'll start with you, Mr. Tsafos. What is the single most important, in your view, most important factor for achieving availability, sustainability, affordability over a reasonable time horizon? Just one thing that dominates.
I would say flexibility. It's a world that's changing incredibly quickly. What you had to do in 2010, what you had to do in 2015, what we had to do in 2022, what we have to do today is totally different. The world is changing and you have to be adapting. You can't just be saying, oh, here's what I did 5 years ago. I have to keep down this path. And you have to be nimble. I think if we do that, in combination with being pragmatic, looking at the numbers, not just theories, and focusing on execution, if you can do those things, I think you're in a good place.
Thank you. Flexibility noted. Lev.
Disciplined ambition. So if you actually don't have that ambition, you're not going to make any kind of dent. We are deploying $3.5 billion in the energy transition, while at the same time ensuring energy security as well as affordability. Not an easy task, but a very important aspect of what we are trying to do every single day. And when I say disciplined ambition, it's actually about making sure you always have a keen eye towards building things that actually work in a very economically efficient as well as sustainable way. If you build a white elephant, it never changes its complexion. It remains a white elephant forever. So being disciplined will mean that over the long term, you've got something that actually can sustain itself in the best possible sense of the word, economically as well as for the climate and the larger good.
Right, disciplined ambition.
And I would add decisiveness from governments, an understanding and willing to lead our citizens with the understanding that the technology is already there and the renewables is the future. And there's no point in kind of thinking that that's not going to happen. The UK is can be a huge centre for offshore wind, should be a provider, an exporter of renewable energy to our neighbours. But that requires decisiveness, drive, ambition, and a willingness to lead.
Thank you. Delis?
I couldn't say something more. I think this is one.
But you have to say one more.
No, on what the Lord mentioned. Decision-making capacity of the governments is what we need to see, because the world is changing constantly. 1 month ago, I was in another conference where they were discussing how significantly the demand has dropped comparing to the expectations we had. And this has to do not because we don't light up the lights at home. This is because Europe is getting deindustrialized. Germany is getting deindustrialized. They don't have cheap natural gas anymore. So this is a big problem. What does it mean? The governments, the institutions, the authorities must decide quickly and must be willing to intervene to accelerate the pace of investments in the world towards the green transition that we experience.
Thank you. Yanni.
Besides what I have already mentioned about not anymore either or, but both and, two more words. Climate patriotism, which means the Greek way, the Greek path towards green transition based, giving priority on Greek industries, on green Greek products like solar water heaters, industrial batteries, electric cables, steel pipelines, aluminum frames, and others produced by concrete sectors of the Greek production framework. All these should be formulated in a total national holistic strategy towards 2030, a green transition based on products and services made in Greece.
Thank you. John?
I think, I agree with all points identified, and I believe all of them boil down to two. I mentioned two, not one. Focus and determination. We need to take opportunity of the excellent momentum that today exists for our country. Projects exist. Vision, I think, exists. We need to be able to overcome all obstacles, like bureaucracy. So we have to be determined to overcome bureaucracy. We have to educate society in order to accept faster renewable energy projects. So I think it's focus and determination by all stakeholders in order to, as I said, do not lose our momentum, the excellent momentum that today exists.
Thank you. Just to sum it up, it was flexibility, discipline, ambition, which is a complex context, decisive from the part of the state in facilitating the whole process, and everybody agreed on that. Putting emphasis on green products that facilitate the transition, and focus on delivering things with no delay. Using the prerogative of the moderator, I will add one more thing, that markets, energy markets in Europe must become more effective and transmit non-distorted signals to investors and consumers. Thank you very much, all the panel, for the very interesting and no need more.